a really optimistic piece focusing on the Kings' short and long-term futures. Nice enough to join us, the author of that piece. Of course, he's the former editor-in-chief for the California Aggie out of UC Davis, the senior NBA writer for The Ringer, Howard Beck. How are you today, Howard?
Gentlemen, I'm doing well. Thank you for that very kind introduction. I, of course, always appreciate the UC Davis shout-outs. And the California Aggie shout-out is like, that's like icing on the cake. That's just awesome.
You're welcome. You write about plenty of room for growth for the Kings here. What would you say this roster, and I know you were just out here, Howard, what would you say this roster needs the most going forward?
Oh man, it's, there's so many different ways to look at this. And look, I'm one who, and you can tell by the tenor of the story, I believe that in this league, there's a certain amount of patience that you need with especially young teams. That's not always easy to come by. And so my answer to what they need is tempered by that, because like the easy thing to say would be like, I don't know, go out and find yourself a top 10 player, because they've got, two really good players who are, top, in a given year, top 15 to 20, 25. They both made all NBA before. So, but there's a huge difference in this league between having a Fox and a Sabonis versus having a Jokic or a Steph or a LeBron in his prime, right? So I think the interesting thing for the Kings and this applies to most of the league, right? Because like the MVP results will come out in the next few weeks, and Jokic probably wins it again, and Shea will be on there, and Luka, Giannis. If you don't have one of those guys, then you have to find another path. So having at least two guys who are all NBA caliber, as the Kings have, is a start. Can you get a third all NBA-ish caliber guy? Can you get two all NBAs plus a guy who's off and on all-star? Can you just have a really incredibly well-calibrated supporting cast? Because that's kind of what Denver has, right? Like I cited Denver multiple times in the story, and for good reason. They've done this kind of a different way. Yes, Jokic has become a generational superstar, not to be, asterisked away in any of this, but Jamal Murray, while all-star caliber, has not been an all-star or all-NBA. And Aaron Gordon was, a draft bust in Orlando, or at least that would be the way that they would, I'm sure, portray him there. And Kentavious Caldwell-Pope bounced around, and Michael Porter Jr. was, obviously an injury concern. And also, like, they just have a really well-calibrated supporting cast. It's not star-studded. And so there are alternate ways to build. If Keegan Murray just makes a leap, and that's totally, plausible, now you have three stars. I mean, if you have three, top 25, top 30, you're in business. Mm-hmm. And, you still need to fill out the rest of the roster. And I think their bench is pretty weak, unfortunately. There's other things they can do around the margins. But a Keegan Murray leap changes everything. Mm-hmm. Without that leap, it becomes, do you have enough movable pieces and picks to try to go get their version of, as I again alluded to in the story, some version of a Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Aaron Gordon, right? Like, without those guys, the Nuggets are not the Nuggets. As great as Jokic is, they're not a championship team without those two guys. And those are guys that anybody could have gotten. They were available players mm-hmm. on reasonable contracts who are not superstars. And you can build that way in this league. So that's the task for Monty McNair and Wes Wilcox in that front office.
The Ringer's Howard Beck joining the Drive Guys, Sactown Sports 1140. Howard, I'm listening to you, and I agree. I feel like, however, in the NBA, you need the guy. And so let me ask you this, the timeline of things. Do you have the guy first and then win the championship? Or does winning the championship produce the guy, if you know what I mean? And if so, yeah. Can De'Aaron ascend to that? Can he be that?
I mean, that's a really difficult thing So various points in the trajectory of, say, Giannis, who's been a two-time MVP and finals MVP, or Jokic, there were moments where you would have looked at them and said, man, there's some really interesting stuff going on here. This guy's got some real talent, and there's an outline of somebody special here. I don't know what levels they'll reach. And, then you become an MVP, but you haven't won a championship yet. And it's like, all right, well, fine. You were the best player statistically this season, and your team won a lot of games, but you haven't won at the highest level. So there's always these doubts. There's always another bar to cross. And yeah, sometimes we don't know that a guy is the guy with a capital T and a capital G until they actually show it. But I also do think there are different, tiers of stars in this league. And is Fox ever going to be in that top tier where we're talking about him in an MVP discussion? I don't know. You would have never said Jalen Brunson was going to be in that discussion, but he was 5th on my ballot this year, and he was probably 5th and maybe higher on a lot of other people's ballots. I don't think he's going to win, obviously, but to go from second-round pick, bench player, role player, guy who when the Knicks signed him, people thought they were overpaying, to suddenly being one of the top 10 to 15 players in the league, at least for this season, and probably for the foreseeable future, like that. These things do happen. So I'm never going to sell short any player. De'Aaron Fox is incredibly talented. I think he's about all the right things. And, we'll see.
Howard Beck is with us, senior NBA writer for The Ringer. Is an excellent post on the Kings that I think he just posted yesterday. And you write in the piece, Howard, of course, about how the vibe was different this year. You were just out here the April 11th game against New Orleans, contrasting that to what we had here last year. How much of the fan, and we've been talking about this all year, how much of the fan letdown do you think is due to maybe some unrealistic expectations coming into this year?
Yeah, and I just want to say, too, that having come out there for a couple of games, it was the Pelicans and Suns on the back-to-back nights. The most important part personally was that, aside from getting to visit some family out there, which was very important, I got one of those free purple cowbells. So after 20-something years after being tortured by the big cowbell.
I remember that. Yeah,
when I was covering the Lakers, I now have my own cowbell, and I'm very happy about that. So it's sitting on my bookcase. Obviously I'm watching this from afar, but obviously I have my California roots, and I was when I was at Davis, it was during the very dark times of that Kings franchise. And I have so much respect for the Kings fans and the passion of those fans, again, having lived through all the Lakers-Kings series. And I was really happy for people last season when they have this big breakthrough, and you could just feel what a combination of, relief and exhilaration and just the thrill of it all. And it was great. And to me, it was just so interesting this season. I was in the preseason, I was on with Deuce and Mo talking about, I think on their podcast or whatever, talking about, listen, my fear for the Kings this year is that everybody's going to expect that this will be linear, that they'll just take the next leap, because that's what everybody expects in this league. You break through, and then it's like, okay, cool. Next year it's the second round or the conference finals. And I thought, given that they were pretty much the same team, and given the way that the West was, people getting healthy, teams adding players, the Kings might be just as good as they were and sink. And that's exactly what happened. And I'm not often right in October about what's going to happen, but that one you could kind of see coming. And if people are disappointed, I get it. I'm sure that Kings fans out there, I'm sure, have a really strange mix of feelings about this season, but they were pretty much the same team, give or take a couple of wins. And yeah, there's a bunch of frustrating losses along the way to bad teams and blown 20-point leads. And I get all of that, but I think that they're not backsliding. They might backslide relative to the rest of the league getting better, but those things are fluid. And as I again note in the story, the Suns are built around Kevin Durant, who is very, much closer to the end than the beginning, and LeBron's closer to the end, and Steph is closer to the end, and Kawhi Leonard is closer. There's all these teams in that glut in the middle of the West that, are going to kind of age out. And so if the Kings can just keep evolving, growing, add a piece here or there, I think they're in good shape. But no, it's not always going to be this steady rise from season to season where you get to 48 wins and then 50 and then a championship. It's rarely that way.
Howard Beck joining us here. Howard, let's continue that conversation, because you do talk about the patience. And I think from a Kings fan's perspective, it's hard to be patient when I'm watching Minnesota and young Anthony Edwards in the playoffs. I'm watching OKC, a young, talented team, number one in the West. I'm watching the Pelicans destroy us 6 times. So how difficult is it to be patient when in this arms race of a Western Conference?
Very, very, because if you're feeling it as fans and media, and certainly ownership is going to be feeling it, and the front office is going to be feeling it. Like everybody would love to talk about the need to be patient, and they do at times, usually in hushed tones in this league. Like it's hard to. I mean, sometimes in more than hushed tones, right? Like you are trying to message to your fans too, like, hey guys, be patient with us, please don't yell. But it is hard because the pressure is always there to win, and the lifespans of teams are shorter than ever because contracts are shorter than ever, and stars hopscotch around the league, and so you can't. There's a difference between being patient and being lackadaisical or ambivalent or just sitting in cruise control. Like you're never in cruise control, but patience just simply means not breaking things up too soon, right? Like the Kings have a bad habit, as you guys know, of firing coaches and front offices every couple of years. Sometimes because they hired the wrong people to begin with, but sometimes they had the right people. Hello, Michael Malone. I don't know why Denver keeps coming back into this, but they do. But you need to hire the right people and then be patient and let them do their jobs. And then those guys need to be patient with the young players that they've acquired or drafted, and give a team time to grow and gel and see what their potential is. Now, as soon as you think, you know what, maybe we've just plateaued. Okay, patience time is over. Figure out who your core essential people are and swap out some of the others. But the Nuggets took a long time to get where they were again. And there were definitely calls years ago, not that long ago, for, you know what? Jokic needs a better co-star. Maybe they need to swap out Jamal Murray for somebody else.
Yeah.
And where would they be today if they had succumbed to that? And they bided their time, and they pounced at the right time to get, again, the guys like Aaron Gordon and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope. Like, I hate to keep harping on that, but they are such the ideal example. The Bucks too, right? Like the Bucks don't break through until they acquire Drew Holiday. And that's another one of those where it's an opportunistic move. Was Drew Holiday on the top of everyone's wish list at the time? Probably not. Oh, maybe he should have been. But he, again, not a guy who's a top 5 player or a superstar in the common definition. But those guys come available every so often. And the patience thing is make sure you've held back enough of your picks or other assets to make a deal when one of those guys becomes available.
Yeah, we're talking with Howard Beck from The Ringer. Howard, we've been talking. You write about how tough the West is. You just mentioned it there. It's been that way for years. Looks like, though, next year, the West, that'll be a walk in the park for the Kings, right? Nothing to worry about in the West next year, right?
Oh, man. Well, and that's the tough thing, too. I will note, because I think Kyle mentioned it a minute ago, like, when you look at the top of the West, like, the Nuggets aren't going anywhere. And if you look at the key players who are anchoring the teams that finished at the top, they're better than the guys the Kings have. That's not a knock on the Kings, but like Shea and Anthony Edwards and Jokic, like these are difference makers at a different level. So, that part's tough because you're not expecting to leapfrog them anytime soon, but other things will come into play too, right? Like the Timberwolves have tax issues and, there's been speculation for over a year now around the league that they're going to have to move off of Karl Anthony Towns, that even the Naz Reid re-signing last summer was perhaps in part because they knew they needed to, have an alternative if they move Towns. They'll probably get a boatload of stuff back for Towns too, by the way, but tax concerns will come into play. Other things will come into play. There will, nothing is as obvious or predictable as it seems in the moment.
Howard Beck joining us here, the Drive Guys, Sactown Sports, 1140. Howard, how do you view Domantas Sabonis on a championship contender? Is he a number 3? What does he need to improve on? What's the perfect complement of players around him? Because we were just having this discussion, and I'm looking at De'Aaron Fox, and I would actually like to see the ball more in Fox's hands, even more so than it is. But it's hard to do when you're running the offense through Domas. So how do they maximize the offense in their drive to the playoffs, with Domantas Sabonis as a centerpiece?
Yeah, it's tough because, it's not just that he's the centerpiece, he's the center. And in this league, you usually rely on your center to be, a rim protector and a defensive hub. That's not who Domantas Sabonis is. Now, he's a great rebounder and a great defensive rebounder, and those things matter too. And he can be good enough defensively, but he's not a classic rim protector. But then again, here we go back to Denver. Neither is Jokic, and the Nuggets found a way to go from bottom third defensively to respectable defensively to, I think this season maybe they actually got to top 10 in defensive efficiency. And then you would have never, ever, ever predicted that or said it was even possible, because you would have said you can't do it with that kind of center. So there's proof of concept there again. And again, this goes back to, can you find your Aaron Gordon and your Kentavious Caldwell-Pope? Because if your perimeter defense is shorn up, and if you've got a lot of big, athletic, long, switchable guys, then it's less pressure on your big man. So that's one way. Indiana already tried the other way and just, concluded that it wasn't working to have Sabonis and Miles Turner together, even though Turner is a shot blocker. And it's like, oh, well, so that should be the ideal pairing. And no, Sabonis isn't really a shooter, so he's not going to stretch the defense. But hey, Turner can, because he is a three-point shooter. That seemed like it should have been the right combination, but it wasn't. And the Pacers needed to make a change. So I don't think it's bringing in another center, moving Sabonis back to power forward. So where does that leave you? I'm not sure. But I have to believe that a player with that much talent as Domantas Sabonis has, you find a way to put the pieces around him that allow him to flourish and that can hide some of his deficiencies.
Howard Beck with us. And Howard, earlier you mentioned your ballot, and I know who you vote for is your business. And so if you don't want to answer this, we totally understand, respectfully. But tomorrow we find out who the sixth man of the year is, and I'm wondering if you might be willing to share with us who got your vote for sixth man of the year, because obviously we're very excited about the possibilities here in Sacramento.
I had Monk second behind Naz Reid, which I know is just going to drive people nuts.
Well, good night. Thanks.
Been real. Go ahead. Yeah. No, look, Malik Monk had a really strong case, and the injury hurt him in part. Naz Reid just having an incredible season was just part of it too. Like they were like. It was almost a coin flip between the two, to be honest. And the thing is with these ballots, we all debate these things to death. We agonize over it. And I know for most of us, who vote, it is agonizing. Like you spend hours poring over this stuff, and, no one's paying us to be voters. We're just, doing it because it's a responsibility, and it's somewhat of an honor, and someone's got to do it. But it takes a lot of time and thought and agonizing. And there are times where it feels like I'm just splitting hairs. And this was one of those. Like I could have, if I had clicked Malik Monk instead, I would feel no better or worse about it today than had I clicked Naz Reid, which I did. Like it was that close. They're both deserving, but you have to pick at some point. And so you start splitting hairs, and you start looking at games played, and you start looking at, you start looking at win totals too. Because that's the thing, like sixth man of the year, I know people look at it as like, oh, this is a purely individual award. It's not. Like I would not have put, and I didn't, Bogdan Bogdanovic on, because he was an incredible sixth man for the Hawks this year. The Hawks blew. Like the Hawks were a crap team. I'm sorry. Like what is the point of being the best sixth man if you're on a team that can barely make the play-in?
Right.
So extrapolating from there, Naz Reid's sixth man role was more important more influential on a Minnesota team that obviously won a lot more games than the Kings. And so the win total came into effect too. And that's not on Malik Monk, but I just think that when you're honoring defensive player of the year, sixth man of the year, MVP, obviously, I think wins are baked in, because what is the point of being the best at fill in the blank if it didn't help your team win a lot of games?
Howard, my final question for you, man, before I let you go. You brought up Malik Monk. We're talking about sixth man of the year. We talk about patience with this team. Do they need to re-sign Malik Monk? Like, if they lose Malik Monk, how big of an impact is that on this team?
I think he'd be a huge loss. I really do. I love watching that guy play, and I like everything about him. Like, and even his personality. Just like there's just an energy there, and a confidence and a swagger and an aggression. All these things that you love to see in a player. I love what he's grown into. He was basically like left for dead in Charlotte, but everybody's left for dead in Charlotte. And the way he's revived his career and become a really important player and a really valuable one, which is why they might lose him, right? Because teams with cap room are going to come chasing, and the Kings are limited in what they can pay, and they might lose him. I do think they should, easy for me to say because it's not my, checkbook or luxury tax bill, but I think they should do everything possible to re-sign him. It's hard in a salary cap league to replace a guy when you lose him. Just because he's making X amount doesn't mean you can go out and pay the same amount to somebody else because you're over the cap. So it's hard. And then the task becomes find the next diamond in the rough. Yeah. And we'll see how that plays out in a couple months.
Gotcha. And Howard, before we let you go, I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for joining us, of course. But years ago, during the heyday of the Kings-Lakers rivalry, and you were writing for, I believe, the Times. We did
Daily News.
Yeah, Daily News. Pardon me. On this station, we did a bit. I think it was on a game day, and I sent my partner out to the hotel where the Lakers were early in the morning, and he knocked on Shaq's door, and he had free throw shooting for dummies, a book we made, and he brought him some bricks. And you wrote about it, and you wrote about how I think you called it the hometown radio station, their lame bit, which was fun. But you talked to Shaq. You asked Shaq, and Shaq said something like, "If I'd opened the door and those guys there, I would have killed them." And I think about that sometimes when I see Shaq, and I realize, yeah, he probably would have. So that was an important lesson, think of the consequences of things. So I just wanted to thank you for that. Cause I think of that. I see Shaq and I think, wow, I'm lucky I didn't lose a friend that day. So thank you for getting Shaq's view of that.
Absolutely. If I'm remembering correctly, because there was only one hotel, it was the Hyatt, and the Sheraton hadn't even been built yet, I don't think. And, there were very few places cities where we, the media, would actually stay at the team hotel, but that was one of them. So I heard early in the morning, one of those mornings, maybe that morning, people banging on doors trying to find the Laker players. And we were never on the same floor as them, right? There's not a chance in hell that they would ever put, beat writers on the same floors as the team. But somebody was banging on doors trying to find them, I think. And it was probably you guys. Thanks.
I don't know because my friend.
This is the same year that Kobe got food poisoning.
I think it was, and we had nothing.
That one wasn't you guys.
Nothing to do with that. Yeah, crazy times. I don't think my buddy was really. He was so scared. I think he was barely not. I don't think he was pounding on the doors there, but obviously it could have gone sideways on us. So anyway, thanks, Howard, and it's a wonderful piece. Thanks for explaining it to us. We hope to catch up with you again soon.
Appreciate it, fellas. Thank you.
All right, Howard. Take care, man.
Pride of UC Davis.
Yes.
Howard Beck.
Great guy. Howard is. Good sport, too. He's also. That's.
Speaking of national media, you won't believe this. Even your buddy Hollinger, I know I mentioned.
Oh, yeah.
Even Hollinger says the Kings' outlook is very promising.